Hello, and welcome to this month's TELedvisors webinar. If you haven't joined us before, it's great to have you here, and if you have joined us before, it's great to have you back. I'm Colin Simpson, one of the leaders of the Ascolite TELedvisors network. TELedvisors network is a community of practitioners for people working in roles such as learning designer, education technologist, and of course, academic developer. One of our challenges in the work that we do is that there is a lack of clarity about who and what we do. This in turn can make it harder for people to know who the best person to turn to for advice is. Now, my personal definition based on my research of academic developers is that they work primarily in support of the pedagogical side of things in higher education institutions. They tend to work in academic positions, they undertake research relating to the scholarship of learning and teaching, and they provide training and advice about learning and teaching to academics. In some cases, they may also be involved in curriculum design, but this is just my definition, and there are many more out there. Which brings us to today's topic. Academic developers, what do they do? What do they know? Let's find out. We're joined today by three people working as academic developers and one who is a learning technologies developer. They'll speak for 10 to 15 minutes and then we'll have around 5 minutes for questions. You can also post questions and comments in the chat and we will come back to these in this time. TELedvisors webinars are always recorded and can be found on our YouTube channel and the TELedvisors community site. So right now we have Erik. Erik Brogt is the Associate Professor of Academic Development in the Learning Evaluation and Academic Development team at the University of Canterbury. He is also the inaugural chair of the Academic Development Special Interest Group within Hersa. Are you ready to go, Erik?
I think I am.
All right.
So I can actually make the technology work, given that I'm a card-carrying Luddite. Kia ora, colleagues, and greetings from New Zealand. Yeah, so thank you so much for the invite to just share with you some of my thoughts about what academic development is and what we do. The situation in New Zealand is, I guess, slightly different from the situation in Australia, in the sense that almost all academic developers in New Zealand are academics. And that has sort of its grounding in the Education Act here, because all academic developers here teach into postgraduate certificates or postgraduate diplomas in higher teaching and learning. And the Education Act here says that teaching at universities needs to be done primarily by people who are research active, which basically means that we have to be academics, which is great in a way, but it does add a different level of tension, because we have a very heavy service load, of course, but we are also being held to the same academic standards as any other academic. So I wanted to share just some ideas with you about what it is that I do on a daily basis, and I admit that this will have a bit of a New Zealand context to it. So I am getting mildly, well, more than mildly confused about the different terminology that is being used. I did my postgraduate work in the US, and there the phrases educational developer, instructional designer, and learning designer all seem to be what here in New Zealand is called an e-learning advisor or an e-learning developer. And academic developers do exist, but they are there in the US are typically called like professors of practice and things like that. So it's confusing, and between Australia and New Zealand there is and again substantial levels of confusion in the terminology. So my rule of thumb that you can see on the slides, like an academic developer is basically somebody who supports teaching and learning the institution. And as the previous speakers have said, it's like largely with a pedagogical background. However, in the literature, there's now, oh, I need to turn off something. Hold on. I have no idea how to do that, but that's okay.
Interrupt. It was just the notifications down in the bottom right corner, because they'll come up on the recording.
Hold on one second. Notification settings. There we go. Pop-ups, 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 pop-ups are all off. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to be smooth about that.
Yes. So within the literature, we now see a change to an academic developer needing to support the whole of institution, the whole of person, and the whole of the academic role, which I find very interesting in the sense that where does the expertise of the academic developer sit in that point? Most of us have a background in pedagogy, not all of us. But if we are suddenly supposed to be supporting academics in their research role, in their service role, in their teaching role, at all levels of their career, that becomes a rather daunting task, I must say. So who we are, Tony Harland and his colleagues did some study on where academic developers come from. And it's basically all over the show. Most of us are academic migrants coming from a discipline. In New Zealand, most academic developers will have a PhD, but not necessarily a PhD in education. It might be a PhD in the sciences, in the arts, but all of them are interested in higher education, research, and teaching and learning. So that is, again, confusing. The other thing that is confusing, and I'm not sure how the situation is in Australia, is that we sit anywhere in the organization. The way where I sit within the organization is my team leader reports directly to our assistant vice chancellor academic. But colleagues of mine in other universities report to a center director who reports to another director who reports to the PVC teaching and learning who reports to the provost. So basically, we are all over the show, and where we sit in the organization determines to a large extent where we can have influence. So in my case, I can quite easily influence people because I'm relatively close to the top table. And I'm also located at central instead of in a department. So I have cultivated this sort of aura of I'm independent and neutral, and I can go into a situation within a department or within a college, and people will see me as somebody who is there to support teaching and learning and doesn't necessarily come with a political agenda. And that can help quite a bit. But that's not the case for all of us, and definitely not the case in different universities within New Zealand. So if I look at my colleagues and how they see themselves, again, that varies dramatically based on how they sit in a particular organization. So I have colleagues at one university here in New Zealand who see themselves as higher education researchers. That is what they do, and that is what they focus on. I have colleagues else in another university who see themselves quite clearly as a service provider. So we are here to help colleagues with teaching and learning. And in my case, I span the range because I'm the only academic developer at this university, where I do research in higher education, teaching and learning. I do discipline-based education research, and I'm also involved in strategic matters in terms of helping set up academic policies, and having interventions in departments, or trying to help with structured curriculum support for new programs of study. So in my daily job, as I said, as I started this this presentation, I'm a self-professed Luddite. It's not as bad as I make it out to be, but I make a very clear delineation in my line of work and my colleagues in the e-learning support team that we have. I really see them as part of academic development. They just have a different area of specialization. So they will sit much more in sort of the technological knowledge and the technological pedagogical knowledge, where my area is much more in the pedagogical knowledge and the pedagogical content knowledge. So when we design workshops together, and we were actually doing that today, that for a suite of workshops that we want to roll out, is that we find for each workshops where in the TPAC model we want to offer this, which then determines like who are best positioned to deliver those particular workshops to reach the learning outcomes that we want to have. I also work reasonably closely with HR and the learning and development team, which is much more organizational development, so that's not just teaching and learning. And with our Kayahari, who are my bicultural counterparts, so those are people with a background in education and in Te Ao Maori and Mataranga Maori, to help implement elements of bicultural pedagogy within the courses, which is definitely not an area of expertise that I claim to have, since I'm not originally from New Zealand. And the same is true for our Kayari Pacifica, who help colleagues implement elements of Pacifica culture within their courses. So we are spread all over the organization with different reporting lines, but we do try and collaborate, because ultimately what we want to do is to build capacity and capability within the organization for good teaching and biculturally grounded and culturally aware. And whether that is through e-learning support or through what I call analog academic development, that all depends on what the particular colleague wants. One of the things that we are quite strong about, at least here at the University of Canterbury, is that the academic needs to drive. The academic with whom we collaborate, so we can help them shape their thinking about what they want, but we can't sort of impose sort of a solution on them, because at best you get compliance behavior, but not necessarily engagement behavior. So that is not something that will be sustainable long term. So as I said, a day in the life of an academic developer. These are some of the things that I was thinking about as I put this presentation together. Like, what have I done over the past couple of weeks? And that is something like this. So I span the entire organization. On one day, I work with an individual lecturer on, say, redesigning an assessment. And an hour later, I can sit in a college executive meeting talking about how to completely reshape the first year of, say, the Bachelor of Arts. I would like to draw your attention to the last line, the other duties as required. That is, I think I put it in a teaching portfolio once, that part of my job is grease in the machine. So trying to keep things working. The previous speakers mentioned the importance of relationships. That is definitely something I would echo. If you don't have the relationships, if you don't have the trust, then you can't be effective. So you have to be out there in the trenches with the academics. And part of it is just as a sparring partner and a sounding board for colleagues, trying to see, oh, I want to try something, and how do I go about that, and I can help them with that. The other thing is the way that I've described myself in the teaching portfolio that I put together once. Part of me is Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction. I fix problems. I just come out and fix problems, and God knows how to do it, but sometimes it actually works. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the Hersa Academic Development SIG. We started this late in 2017, and we were formally approved by the Hersa executive in 2018. And it really was, for me, an attempt to get more friends, simply because I'm the only academic development here. And in New Zealand, because it's such a small community, every academic development event also has the subtitle Erik Needs Friends, which Barbara Kensington Miller started a few years ago, and it since has taken on a life of its own. But what I wanted to do with the special interest group is really to have a platform where we can talk with one another. In New Zealand, and I suspect in Australia as well, we're all in very small units, so we don't have many peers on campus. So we really wanted to have a place where we can connect, share ideas, and basically have a community of practice. So that's what we've been trying to do. It's a bit slow going, simply because we're trying to come up with a place, a virtual place where we can have conversations and share resources, but at the same time be very much aware that we don't want to violate copyrights on various issues. So it's those small logistical issues that sort of keep the communication a little bit, what's the word? Can't think of the English word right now. The communication is not all that smoothly yet, but we're working on it. And so that's basically what I have to say, and I'm happy to take questions either now or later, depending on what Colin wants. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you so much, Erik. I do have a lot of questions. I think there's been some very lively chat. I think probably we will keep going, just so we've got a little bit more time at the end, and we just smash through all of the questions. So people, please keep, show your appreciation for Erik. And yeah, people can be just making notes of comments, questions in the chat, and we'll sort of circle back to all of these at the end.